Welcome to Stillwater Edge, the ultimate podcast for stillwater fly fishing enthusiasts. I'm your host, Greg Keenan, and in each short, action-packed episode, I'll share expert tips, essential techniques, and clever tricks to help you elevate your stillwater fly fishing game to the next level. Welcome to the Stillwater Edge, and I'm Greg Keenan. I'm your host, and today is Spring's Secret Weapon, Mastering Bloodworms on Stillwater. This is a really cool topic, one of my favorite topics of this underutilized fly. So I'm going to jump right into it, and today we're going to dive deeply into an early season secret weapon, and that is the bloodworm. These small, bright red larvae are a lifeline for trout coming out of the winter, and mastering how to fish them effectively can make the difference between an empty net and a banner day on the water. In this episode, we're going to cover everything you need to know about bloodworms, from where they are to where you can find them to the best methods of fishing for them, whether you're working from a static position or a slow retrieve. If you're up for it, ready to up your stillwater game, let's get started. All right, guys, there we are. My intro is done. Let's jump to it and let's go. So bloodworms, all right? To understand bloodworms is super important. It's the why, the when, the how of bloodworms. I'm going to run through this really quickly because it's super important to understand this bug and how it affects trout in the early season and why it's such an effective fly and an effective method to fish, okay? So the role of bloodworms in early spring, and why bloodworms are key in early spring. So as the ice thaws and the temperatures remain cold, food sources are limited. We all understand that, I hope. But bloodworms, which thrive in the mud, in the mud, like the bottom of the lake, the mud, are the first consistent food sources for trout available. Okay, I'm going to read that again and slowly. Bloodworms thrive in the mud and are the first consistent food sources available for trout. It's the consistency that the trout care about. Okay? So trout actively seek out bloodworms because of their high hemoglobin content, which provides energy for the trout. Okay? So that's why. So it's consistency and energy. Everything a trout needs to survive. Bang, they just woke up from deep sleep. We're ready to go. And that's the trout's doing its job. So that's the why bloodworms are effective, okay? When are they most effective? Well, bloodworms are most effective during the early mornings and late afternoons, which are a prime feeding window for trout. Like, it's all kind of coming together here, and I assure you at the end of this podcast, you're going to be like, wow, I totally get it. So the why, we have understanding is they're consistent and trout need them because it provides energy. We have the feeding windows, which is like the mornings and the evenings, which is when trout feed. Perfect. So the how do we identify where they are so that we can fish our fly in that area? Okay, well, we want to look for muddy bottom, shallow water, silty bays, or areas near weed beds. Here in British Columbia, where I am, all our high mountain lakes in the Okanagan region have pretty much muddy bottoms. They're muddy bottoms. And you can effectively pretty much fish a bloodworm throughout that entire lake. Obviously, in the shallower water, they'll be more effective than the deeper water, but not always, but often, right? Enough confidently that I would say 90% of the time. And effectively, that is where you want to target those bloodworms, or you want to fish your fly in that area. But if you go to other areas, in say Ontario or down in the States where it's granity and sandy kind of bottoms, what you want to do is I want you to look for the weedy areas and the weed patches and start fishing your bloodworms in those kind of areas. Those are key. Anywhere where it's not so rocky, like a lot of the dams in the United States, which provide great still waters, but they're really rocky. And there's not a lot of, vegetation or muddy bottoms. It's all, granite or limestone or whatever it is. Right. So what you want to do is identify where these are by those muddy bottoms, because that is key. Because the trout, you'll find the trout, and if you have polarized sunglasses on, which I highly suggest, you'll find them often. Their behavior is tailing, or they're feeding moments where they're digging and rooting in the mud, and they're digging up sediment. What are they doing? People ask. Well, they're looking for bloodworms. At that time of year, they're looking for bloodworms. They're actively seeking out bloodworms. They're digging in that mud, spitting up the mud to try and get bloodworms. They're hungry. They want energy. And there's an abundance of bloodworms. So that's what they're doing. So the clues are actually looking for stuff like that. So that's the why, the when, and the how for bloodworms. the key now is how do we fish for bloodworms effectively? Well, there's two ways, okay? Two ways that I know of. The first is a static position, okay? A static position, which is like what I'm going to say 85% of anglers out there do, okay? Or at least most of the anglers I know of, they fish a static position. So they take their bloodworm, they put it under an indicator, they cast it out, and there you go. They wait for a trout. Very effective. Is it effective? 100% effective. It is effective. Is it fun? It could be boring. It's staring at an indicator. Is it? Again, it's effective if the fly is in the right depth, if your control is there, and you have the right color, which we'll talk about later. But having that indicator set up, on a leader up to 12 feet is a perfect, effective method. And it's great for a beginner that wants to be like, hey, I want to fish bloodworms. Or if a beginner's like, what is everyone catching them on early season, right? Bloodworms. Fantastic. So it can't get more basic than doing that exact setup. As long as you have, say a bloodhead with a tungsten bead head, let's call it a maroon bloodworm, you tie it down there, you got a 12-foot fluorocarbon leader, put it under your indicator, cast it out, let it sit there, you're good to go. If you're in a muddy bottom area and you've done everything correctly, like I've mentioned earlier in the podcast, you should effectively be able to catch fish if they're there. Okay. So that is exactly, couldn't get any easier. If you're looking to level up from that and do new skills or learn a new skill or try a new skill this season, then check this out. Fishing bloodworms with different retrieve methods. And I'm not talking like indicator retrieve methods. I'm talking like retrieve methods where different fly lines. So in episode 4, I believe, I talked about your 3 different fly lines, 3 different fly lines for a lake. And being able to utilize those 3 lines will change and open up fishing a bloodworm and give you many more opportunities to catching fish, particularly big fish in the shallows. So let's go with right off the hop. I mean, if you were to use a full sink and let's say the fish are in, 20 feet of water and a nice full sink, you can do a nice dangle with a bloodworm and it is highly effective. I've caught a lot of fish that way. It's great. It's fun. Rod bends right under the boat. Oh my God, it's so much fun. Okay. Making sure that, again, that the muddy bottom in BC, I don't really have to worry about that. The lakes have that muddy bottom. We definitely do. Some are more than others, but it's still effective enough and it works. I like the shallow water approach myself, but that is an effective method and it does work. And I have done it and I do promote it and I do stand behind that method. Absolutely. But if you used, say, a clear camo line and you sat in the shallows and you cast into, say, 15 feet of water and stripped up a drop-off, another effective method. Now, when I say casting and doing that, one of the coolest things is you want to be able to really fish that bloodworm effectively. It's all in the retrieve pattern that you're going to do. And having that retrieve pattern, which, a slow hand twist or a figure 8 retrieve is effective. But the number one key that I've found is making sure that your fly is in contact consistently with the bottom. So, retrieve, let it sit so it naturally drops back down and has contact with the bottom because that's where the bloodworms live, right? So the fish, they see that and they see that action, they see that natural action and they're like, hey, that's a bloodworm. I'm hungry. Let's get it. It's energy. Boom, done. You've got a fish on. These are really key. So again, using, say, a clear camo, casting that, bringing that in, highly effective method, unbelievable. Opens up a whole world of fishing that fly for bigger trout and for any trout. But, particularly I love stocking trophies. So for bigger trout, I think that's a very effective method because you got a moving fly, you got a presentation, you're covering a lot of water. There's so much variables that you're doing and you're hitting all of them with that one movement. So you're leveling up your game. Really cool. Fishing your drop-offs, I love it. I think it's great. Again, you're covering so much water. So with bloodworms, key, right? I mentioned earlier about color and all that, different colors and patterns. And this is really important in stillwater fly fishing, and that is the presentation and the fly selection. So you want to match your size and you match your hatch. Obviously, if you don't see any bloodworms in the water, a good starting point would be a 12 to 14 hook. Bloodworms naturally range from a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches long, but color matters as well. Color absolutely matters so much. So traditionally, colors of a bloodworm are red and maroon. They're the classic colors, but here in British Columbia and other parts for still waters is we have bloodworms with a greenish or an olive tint. So you definitely 100% before you start the season want to make sure that you have red, maroon, greenish, olivey kind of bloodworms in your fly box of arsenals, because you don't know, because still water's always changing. You don't know what's happening until you get out there. You might tie on a red, nothing will happen. Tie on a green and boom, it's indicators down all day, or it's tight lines all day. That's what it is. Still water's always changing. And to figure that out is key. So making sure you have the right pattern and the right color of bloodworm is key. And how to fish it, the retrieve, is key. So, all right, before I let you guys go, a few little things. Make sure you're staying stealthy, using long leaders, right? Fluorocarbons prime. Fishing bloodworms is so much fun. It's an underutilized fly. It's a consistent early food source for trout. So make sure you're fishing it for that reason alone, right? So my closing thoughts are this. Bloodworms are one of the most consistent and most productive food sources for early spring trout. And learning to fish them effectively will make you a better angler, whether you prefer the precision of a static setup or the engagement of a retrieve method. The key lies in patience, observation, and finesse. Thanks for joining the Stillwater Edge. Until next time, tight lines and happy fishing.